Hello and welcome. In this video, we are going to take another look at our CentOS virtual machine, and specifically, we are going to take a look at our CentOS virtual server. This video is part of a larger series of videos focusing on how to use the Oracle VirtualBox Manager in conjunction with CentOS and VirtualBox networking. Specifically in this video, we are going to focus on how to install the Apache web server on our CentOS server. Now, we're not going to do much in the way of configuring our web server or anything with the firewall. In this video, we're just going to talk about the basics of a web server. And before we go any further, we might as well go ahead and emphasize that our web server is going to be what allows for us to host some basic HTML files that can be reached not only by the machine that is hosting the web server, but also via the private network or the virtual network that we've established by some of the Oracle VirtualBox clients. So to begin with, you want to go ahead and log in as an account that has sudo permissions. You don't necessarily want to do this with root. And the first couple steps, we simply want to make sure that we don't already have the Apache web server already installed, and we simply want to prepare our virtual machine for our Apache web server. So there's a couple of ways that you can go about doing this. Probably the most straightforward way is to simply go ahead and launch a terminal and check to see if the service is already running. And so what we'll do is we will run our sudo with our systemctl that allows for us to check the status of various services as well as start and stop them. And we're going to look for the status of the HTTPD service. Again, remember that the D generally stands for the daemon that actually is used to control the service, and the service is typically started and stopped when the machine boots and shuts down. And we can go ahead and enter in the password for sudo. And you can see here that the HTTPD service is in fact not found. Now that's a good thing because that means that our server does not already have a web server running on it. The first thing that we want to do then is we want to go ahead and run yum-y update. And that's just a good step in general whenever you're adding packages to your machine, particularly something like a web server that may have security ramifications. And at this point, then what we can do is we can go ahead and run sudo yum install and then our HTTPD package. And this will, again, prompt us for the packages as well as any of the dependencies that we're wanting to install for our Apache web server. If you've had a chance to review those, go ahead and select Y. And it's, again, going to download and then start installing the packages that are going to be needed for our Apache web server. Now, in this video, as I said, we're not going to focus too much on the configuration. Instead, what I want to do is sort of look at the structure, if you would, of the Apache web server, and particularly want to take a look at two different locations on the file system. One that's going to be used to handle the configuration and the location of the binaries and the services, and the second one is going to be the location of the files that we ultimately want to host. In this particular case, we are going to be looking at basic HTML files. We'll take a look at them in a later video, but we want to look at those two directories. So the first thing that we do is we cd to the root of our installation, our CentOS installation. We can do it ls-l, and you can sort of see then the structure of the files and folders associated with the root of the directory. And the first place we want to look is actually in the etc folder. We can again do an ls-l, which I encourage you to do each time you go into a new directory until you get comfortable with the Linux operating system. And if we scroll up, you will see that there is now an HTTPD folder. And so what we can do is we can cd into that HTTPD folder, and again do an ls-l, and you will see that there are several folders as well as some links to various commands. We are going to focus on the folders, and specifically we want to look into the conf folder. So we'll take a look by cding into conf, and again doing an ls -L, and you'll see that there is a file called httpd.conf. Now, we're not going to be doing much with the file in this particular video. Rather, I just want to take a quick look at it, and what we can do is we can launch our favorite text editor, whether it's gedit, Nano, VI, or any other package that you may have downloaded. In this case, I'm just going to simply use Nano because it is a lightweight text editor. And for a little bit of variety in other videos, we might pull up gedit. But I'm going to take a look now at my httpd.conf. Notice I'm not using sudo in front of it because I have no intentions of editing this file right now. If anything, I want to make sure that I don't accidentally edit it. And you can see that this is the configuration file for our web server. And again, we're not going to go through all of this in this video, but if you use the cursor then to look through, you'll see that we could choose the port that we're going to be listening on. The default port for a web server is going to be port 80. You see what additional modules, or rather additional configuration files, will be included when you start your web server. You can see where you can create the user and the group for Apache, and control then who has access or who can update your files in your Apache server. And continuing on down here, you could see there's a few other configuration settings. Particularly of interest to us is this document root. And you see that it is var www HTML. So what we want to do is open another tab in our terminal, and we can again cd to the root. This time we want to cd to the var directory and do an ls-l, and you can see that there is in fact a www subfolder, so we could cd into www, and again we'll do an ls-l, and you can see there's two subfolders, and of specific interest to us is the HTML folder. And if we cd into the HTML folder and do an ls-l, again there are no files there yet, because we have just started working with our Apache web server. This is where you will ultimately put your HTML files and any accompanying files, style sheets, and so on to be served by your Apache web server. Now, let's go back to Nano real quick. At this point, we can just hit Control X to get ourselves out of Nano. We didn't make any changes. And what I would like to do is I'd like to look to see if our Apache web server is in fact running. Well, the first thing that we can do here is we can just simply say sudo systemctl, and we can specify the name of the service that we wish to get the status of. So in other words, status and then httpd, and you'll see that it is loaded. In other words, it's set up to be a service. It is currently disabled. It's preset as disabled, but more importantly, it is currently inactive. And the idea is that we have not yet started it. In other words, there is no web server running. It hasn't read that config file or anything like that. And so if we hit Control C, then we can simply go ahead and start the service and rerun then the status, and you'll see that now it is active. It is still technically disabled. What that means is that the next time you reboot the machine, this particular service will not come up automatically. Now, this is probably a good way to leave this currently. In other words, until we actually get some development experience working with a web server, go ahead and sort of start your web server intentionally. In other words, leave it disabled so that it does not automatically start, but then just simply go through and using sudo systemctl start the HTTPD service. Likewise, you can also do a couple of other things with the systemctl in addition to the status. You can also stop the service. And again, after just a second, we can check the status, and you'll see that it is now loaded, disabled, but inactive. And again, Control C will get us out of this. And once again, what we can do is we can simply stop it and start it. And some additional commands that you might find useful is the ability to reload the service, in which case what this will do is it will reread any changes that were made in that configuration file. Now, again, we're not doing any changes in it, so there's nothing to reload. However, though, if you were making changes in the configuration file, they would not be immediately available if you have not started and stopped, or rather stopped and started your service or reloaded it. Now, at this point, then the only thing left to do is, if we were ready, we would want to go ahead and enable then our HTTPD service to start automatically. And the way that you go about doing this is just simply set the HTTPD service and enable it. And at this point, then when you rerun the status, you'll see that it is active and it is also enabled. Now, assuming that you're not yet ready to do that, you can also simply change this to disabled. And again, what this does is it just simply sets then the preset, if you would, not the preset rather, but the service start mode. In other words, in this case, it's set to disabled on boot. But if you notice that the HTTPD or web server is still running. So in your mind, you should sort of separate out then whether the web server is running versus whether it is set as a service. Now, at this point, we've done a lot, but we haven't actually checked to see if our web server is in fact running. And there's a couple of ways that you can go about doing this. Again, probably the easiest way to do it is just simply to launch Firefox. And what we're going to do is we're going to attempt to connect to our web server from the machine that it is being hosted on. And we're going to attempt to do it two different ways. The first way, we will use our local loopback adapter. And if you need a little bit of a reminder of what that is, you can simply run your if config, and you'll notice that your loopback adapter has an IP address of 127.0.0.1. Or as you will see, we can also attempt to connect to the web server using 192.168.2.100. And so let's start with the local loopback address. We will simply go up here to our browser and we will put in 127.0.0.1. And you'll see that you get the HTTP server test page. In other words, this is what Apache launches in the event that you do not actually have any HTML pages set to be served. Now, just to verify that we can get to it at the static IP address associated with the second adapter, we will put in the 192.168.2.100. And again, where did I get that from? Well, that's just simply from my if config. And if we go back to this tab and we attempt to access it, you will see that you do, in fact, get to the web server. And so at this point, your server can get to the web server because it is on the same machine. If you were to try to access your web server from a different virtual machine or from your host, or for that matter, from another computer, you would, in fact, not be able to get access to it. Now, we're going to come back in a later video and I'll show you how to modify your firewall. You could technically just drop the firewall in its entirety, but then again, that is probably not a good thing to do. So that's the end of this particular video. Hopefully you found it useful. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, don't hesitate to reach out to me. And thank you for watching.